Hello everybody, and welcome back once again to Brothers in Air. I got the Flashpup in 25 caliber here. But this video will apply to any Flashpup in any caliber. And today what I'm going to talk about is the high mount on the bullpup here. And obviously a lot of bullpups have a high mount like this. And mine is actually the center line of my crosshairs for my scope to the center line of my bore is 2.6 inches. So just over 2.5 inches from the center line of my scope to the center line of the bore. And that's using a high set of rings. But even with a low set of rings, you're still gonna be a good distance up from the bore. So we got a high mount. And how do we overcome the disadvantages or problems that might come about because of this high mount? And some of you might receive the Flashpup and pull out your favorite scope you've been using on many air guns, and you love it, and you get it mounted up and you find that you only have enough turret adjustment to even reach like a 30-yard zero, and you're bottomed out, so you're, dang, what do? I don't have enough turret adjustment to compensate for the height of the mount on the Flashpup. So you can go out and buy a new scope, and you can get a scope with enough MOA in the turret adjustment to compensate for that height, or you could buy a set of adjustable rings, and both of those are going to be a pretty costly investment, which you may not have the money for. And then another thing that you could do is you could open up your scope rings, and you could shim the back scope ring and put some kind of material in there. There's hundreds of videos about how to shim your scope like that. So, if that's what you want to do, that is one route that you can take. I try to shy away from that kind of just because if you shim too much and you tighten down your rings too tight, you're going to torque your tube. Your scope tube's going to have pressure on it, torquing on it, and you could even possibly bend it permanently. So be careful if you do shim like that and shim your rear ring in your scope ring. Just make sure that you don't over tighten your ring down way too tight, or put too much material in there for your shim, because you will bend your scope tube. And another thing you could do is make or fashion some kind of little shims to go right up in between where the scope ring mounts right to the optic rail. And again, that's something I don't really like to finagle with. It's just kind of a hassle, and trying to get everything in there just right, and then tightening down and all that. So that's something that I like to shy away from also. But one of the things immediately when I was looking at the Flashpup's configuration, and I saw that the way that the optics rail was mounted onto here, one of the things that I thought immediately was that the barrel band is plastic, and so I knew that given that it's plastic, it would have just a little bit of give, with the way that it's mounted. So I thought right away, what if I could shim in here? What if I could bring the back end up that way and compensate for that height that way, so I could extend my range and gain more turret adjustment in my scope. Now, even with the Hawk reticle, which has a fair amount of MOA in the turret adjustment, I was able to, with the high rings, keep in mind, I was able to zero at 45 yards, and with turret adjustment, I could bring a shot out to about 70, 72 yards. And after I shimmed the optics rail back here with a 35 thousandths of an inch shim, which I'm going to show you how I made that in just a moment. But once I did that, I was able to extend that turret adjustment about 45, 50 clicks, So then I had enough turret adjustment to bring it out. I was stuck at about 70, 72 yards before I'd bottom out in adjustment. And with the shim in there, I'm now able, with enough turret adjustment, to go all the way out to like 112 yards and still be a few clicks away from bottoming out on my turret adjustment. So that was great. And So the first thing I thought, here, let me take this off. So the first thing I thought was, obviously this barrel band is plastic, you know, so I knew that it would have some give, but I wasn't sure how much I could bring that back end up without, you know, affecting the integrity of the plastic or putting too much stress on it, you know. So the first thing I did, I'll show you, and all you need in order to take off this optics rail is a 2.5 millimeter Allen key. And I'll recommend to you new guys that are just getting into working on your own guns or whatever, that you immediately go out and buy a metric and standard set of good Allen keys, because you're going to need them and you want to have them, and you don't want to cut any corners there. And you might want to also order like a nice gunsmithing screwdriver set, or just a set of flat blade hollow ground screwdrivers. You know, and get some different size bits and everything for yourself or whatever. But you always want to have good tools, and you always want to use the right tools. You never want to cut any corners. And you know, you find some Allen wrenches laying in the drawer, and it's loose, it don't fit, but you think it'll work, you know, don't even do it, you know, because everything on these air guns is little tiny grub screws and all kinds of hex keyed heads. And they're all, you know, very small. And if you tighten them down too tight and crank them too tight and strip out that head, or you try to use the wrong tools and you end up stripping out that head, you're not going to be in a good spot. You know, now we got to drill it out or back it out, you know, somehow or whatever. And you might not even be able to do that. And even if you are, it's going to be nothing but a headache. So use the right tools. Get some good tools and use the right sizes, and be sure that you're using the right sizes before you go cranking on stuff, loosening and tightening on your air gun. So all you need to remove the optics rail is a 2.5 millimeter Allen key. So the first thing I did was I removed this rear screw that holds the back side of the optics rail in place. And once you get it all the way loose, this screw will just come right up out of here. It's not threaded into the plastic spacer that's in there. So, you got this screw that holds on the rear. Now this screw goes through the aluminum optics rail, and then it goes through this little plastic, you know, it's like a hard plastic composite spacer here. And then that screws right into the breech block. So the first thing that I did was I took that screw out and I gave this just a little pull like this, you know. I just lifted it up on it just a little bit. I wanted to see how much give it had, you know, and how much it would move without really putting any stress on the front end here. So immediately I realized, oh wow, you know, I can move it quite a bit without affecting this much, you know. And that's because of the length of it also, you know. When you raise this up in the back, it's only affecting it right here to a lesser degree, you know, quite a bit. So once I found that out, I thought, this is awesome. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to shim the optics rail. So the front set screw here, well, I shouldn't say set screw. It's not a set screw. The front screw that holds on the optics rail, it goes right in here into the barrel band, and there's a little nut inside the barrel band that it screws into, and that's what holds on the front of the optics rail. All right, so you got this screw. Now be careful, once you get this screw out, if you pick the gun up or anything like that, this little nut, it just fits into this little slot right here. And I'm not going to pick the gun up and show you, just, you know, you can do it yourself. You tip the gun up and give it a little shake, that nut's going to fall right out of this barrel band here, out of the slot, you know, and the barrel band is what holds that nut in place so that when you put the screw through on the front, you know, that's what secures it and tightens it down on there. So just be careful so you don't lose that nut if you tip the gun or anything and it goes flying, rolling across the floor or whatever. All right, so that's it. You know, you've got these two screws holding on the optics rail, just like that. And then you've got this plastic spacer in between. So let's take a look at it. I'm going to take off the rail. Now this little plastic spacer, it's got just this little nub here on the bottom, this little post type deal sticking up, and it only sticks up about 62 thousandths of an inch. And what that does is that fits right into the back, the hole for the back hole for the barrel set screw, and that keeps this piece from being able to spin or twist in there. So if you take a quick close look at this here, the front screw and the back screw, or I should say the front hole and the back hole, are where the set screws are that hold your barrel in place into the receiver, into the breech block. So the middle hole is actually just the threaded hole that holds the optics rail in place. So the longer screw from the rear, it just goes right through the optics rail, through the aluminum rail, and right through this little plastic spacer here, and then it threads right into this center hole and right into the breech block. So based on the way this was and the way that it was set up, I immediately thought right away, I've got some feeler gauges and I bet you it'd work perfect, and I knew that there was already a hole in there just because of the way they're set up. So I took a set of feeler gauges, and you can buy these at Harbor Freight. It's $5 for this cheap little set of feeler gauges. So I guess, you know, as long as you got some tools on hand, $5 is going to be your only cost as far as investment goes. And if you don't have any tools around and you don't have any at the house or whatever, I'm sure you got an uncle or a grandpa or somebody somewhere that's got to have, you know, some drill bits and a couple things that you would need, you know, to fashion some kind of shim to go in there, you know. And you could use plastic, you know, whatever works, you know, use your imagination, you know. But this is what I did because I knew that this would work for me, and I knew that it would be, you know, just something really nice and flat and smooth. And so this is what I used. $5 set of feeler gauges from Harbor Freight. So if you take a look at it, I removed one off of there. It's already got a hole in it. So that works out perfect because I didn't want to shim it. I didn't want to shim it on the top side, you know, because you could also shim it here. You could shim straight right between the optics rail and the bushing, the plastic spacer. You could shim right between there, right here, and just drill one hole through there, and that would be, you know, just fine. But I didn't want to do it that way because I put something in there, you know, and I didn't like the way it looked. You could really just see it in there. And I found when I made it, you know, fashioned a piece to shim on the back here, you know, beneath on the underside here, I found that you could barely even tell it was in there, you know. And I've never had anybody even look at the thing and say, oh wow, what's that in there? You know, it's such a small space in between, and it just mounts in there nice and perfect. So yeah, that's the first thing I did, man. I took one of these feeler gauges, and I realized it's already got this hole in it. So that's cool. It fits right over top of that little nub, you know, that little post sticking out that's got to go into the rear here that keeps it from spinning. So like I said, this little nub is only sticking up about 62 thousandths of an inch. So I didn't shim, my shim that I made is 35 thousandths of an inch. And like I said, that brought me from 70 with enough adjustment all the way out to 112 yards. So 35 thousandths was enough for me. Depending on how you do it or what you need, you know, you might want to go more than that. But if you want this nub to be able to get into here, I wouldn't shim over, you know, 45 or maybe 50 thousandths of an inch, because like I said, this is only sticking up about 62 thousandths of an inch. So if you want it to still grab into that hole and keep it from being able to rotate and spin, then I wouldn't shim on the bottom side over 50 thousandths. But if you were going to shim here on the top, you know, I suppose you could go quite a bit more if you were going to shim right between the piece and the optics rail on the top side of it. But then you also want to keep in mind that this longer rear screw is going through the optics rail, and then it's going through this piece here, this plastic spacer, and then it's threading into the block that far. So however much you shim, you're taking away that much, you know, amount of threads that can go into the block for securing it down. And if you shim too much, you're not going to have enough threads grabbing onto this screw that holds it in place, you know. And the hawk scope, for instance, it's really heavy. So you want to have enough threads going on into the breech block that, you know, when you're tightening it down, you don't pull threads or whatever, man. You jar the gun and somehow it rips loose or something. So, like I said, I made a shim that was 35 thousandths of an inch, and I'm going to show you in just a second. I'm going to make another one real quick just for the video and show you how I did that. And the tools that I needed for it, all I used was this angle grinder and this drill, set of drill bits, and a torch. And that's it. That's all I needed to make this shim out of the Harbor Freight feeler gauge. So let's get to it. Let's make one, and I'm going to just show you real quick how I did it. And like I said, you can make it out of anything you want to. You know, it doesn't have to be a feeler gauge or metal even, for that matter. So, you know, use your imagination. If you don't have this or don't want to go get it, just be careful. You know, always think and have a plan, and stick to your plan, you know, and accomplishing your goals, because you don't ever want to mess your gun up. You know, go slow, take your time, and that's it, man. You just don't ever want to mess your gun up, you know, so take it slow. All right, let's get to it. Let's make one of these things real quick, and then we'll get it mounted up and close out the video. so we made our shim. Like I said, mine is 35 thousandths of an inch, our feeler gauge shim, and all I had to do was measure it down to an inch and cut it, drill an extra hole for the screw that secures it down, and we're ready to rock and roll. Give it a little touch up around the edges, make sure there was no burrs or anything. So let's get it mounted up. And once you get this shimmed, you can get outside and get to shooting and see what you've accomplished and how much it's helped you. And if it's not enough, maybe go a little more, And if you do the feeler gauge thing, that's kind of cool. You could even just make another one and add another 10 thousandths of an inch or whatever you feel you might need. But like I said, just take caution. You don't want to overdo it and not have enough threads going in there, securing down the optics rail or whatever. So, all right, let's get this mounted up. I've already loosened these screws here. So we got the front screw, and we got the rear screw. So I'm gonna pick it up just like this. And actually, I'm just going to leave the rear screw in here just to hold it in place. So now I'm take my shim. I got my 2 holes. It just fits right over top, just like that. And then I'm going to kind of hold it together like so. Kind of line it up and get it right in there where it needs to be. Alright, so there we go. Now, here's another thing. The only screws on this entire air gun that I have ever applied thread locker to is these ones here. And that's the only place that I really can justify putting it. There really is just no need anywhere else. And there may not even be a need here. It's just kind of an extra precaution for me. So I do put just a dab on each of the screws, just a tiny bit, before I tighten it down. Once I've got it set, final the way I know, I want it to be set up and shimmed, and I know I'm not going to be taking it off for quite some time. Then just as an extra precaution, I will apply just a little bit of thread locker to the screws, and then also too, then I feel more comfortable not cranking them down. I can't stress enough, it does not take an incredible amount of pressure and torque to get the screws in your air gun set down nice. There is nothing on this entire gun that requires you to flex or bend an Allen key or something like that. And I'm just forewarning you. I've been there. And I've done that on other guns and on other projects and stuff, So just use the right tools and don't over tighten things. It really does not take that much pressure. And if you're really unsure, order yourself like off of Amazon or something, a $12 inch-pound screwdriver or something. You can set the inch pounds, and then when you're, tightening down things, you get right to your click, click, and you're not over tightening. Maybe until you get the feel or whatever. But just trust me, it's better to not over tighten them, and as long as you're not reefing on stuff and really cranking down, you should be fine. So, like I said, and anytime you remove any screws on any air gun that you've applied some thread locker to, make sure you take like a wire brush or something and just clean that old thread locker out of there. And get the screw nice and cleaned up before you go putting it back in and reinserting it and tightening it down, Especially if you're going to apply more thread locker, you don't want to just keep putting it on top of itself and you get this thing so crudded up and nasty, So just whenever, take a wire brush and clean it up. Keep your screws nice and clean if you are using any thread locker on them. So let's get this front one in here. And like I said, 2.5 millimeter Allen key. And the front screw, like I said, it goes into that little nut. And that nut's just sitting in that little slot inside the plastic barrel band. So I'm just going to snug down the front. I'm going to tighten down the back. And I'm going to be taking this off again, so I'm not applying any thread locker now. But like I said, this is the one place on the gun where I will apply some thread locker when I know I'm not going to be taking this rail off here for a long time. Alright, so now I got the front snug down, I got the rear snug down. Now I'm going to give the rear just a nice little torque, snug it down. Give the front one a nice little torque, snug it down. And like I said, man, they just need to be snug. You know, if you ever get to the point where you start bending or flexing your wrenches, you are tightening it too tight, and you run the risk of screwing up, you know, your hex key heads or whatever, you know. Or you never know, you could be threading into an aluminum block or something, you know, and you've got a really strong Allen key made out of really strong steel, and it's not even bending, you know, and you just tighten it down so hard you can pull threads, and you know, something's got to give. So it's either going to be the head of that, or it's going to be the threading, you know, in the block. You know, something's going to give. So just take caution. I can't stress it enough. I don't mean to repeat myself, but I just, you know, you do not need to tighten this stuff down extremely, extremely tight. All right, so that's it. We shimmed up our optics rail, and like I said, this 35 thousandths of an inch shim allowed me like an extra 45, 50 clicks on my turret. Brought me on out to 112 yards from about 70, 72. So that's exactly what I needed and exactly what I wanted. And I hope this video was helpful for you guys. Like I said, you don't have to make it out of a feeler gauge. You know, you could use anything. Use your imagination, like I said. Just take caution and don't screw up your gun. And I think that this is a great way to accomplish this, and it's very solid. You know, once mounted up and everything, this thing's solid. You can't even see that little shim in there, and it just works great. So happy shooting, everybody. I hope the video was useful. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on the next one.